Thank you for joining us today for this Asia Institute webinar, Quarantine Masks and Disease, Social Discourses of COVID-19 in Japan and Korea. My name is Melissa Conley-Tyler. I'm a research fellow at the Asia Institute, and I'm broadcasting today from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders, past and present, and warmly welcome any Indigenous people who are joining us for today's webinar. Well, congratulations to those who've joined us today. We had 41 registrations, a lot of colleagues and students from the University of Melbourne, but also from much farther afield. So a shout out to those joining us from University of New England, from Western Australia, from Hong Kong, from the UK, from France, and as far afield as Arizona. And particularly for our friend from Arizona, I promise you, we won't be mentioning a certain topic. You have 1 hour guaranteed election-free zone. What we'll be sharing with you today is 4 experts from the Asia Institute at the University of Melbourne who are looking at language, culture, social discourse around COVID-19 in Japan and Korea. And before I turn to our speakers, I'll start off by asking Associate Professor Michael Ewing to talk a little bit about the work of the Asia Institute and in particular the work of the research cluster Asia-Pacific Language Dynamics. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Melissa. And thank you everyone who's joining us for the webinar today. The Language Dynamics in the Pacific, Asia-Pacific is a research culture within the Asia Institute. And the Asia Institute is a school within the Faculty of Arts at the University of Melbourne, specializing in teaching and research on languages and societies of Asia and the Middle East. The Language Dynamics in the Asia-Pacific Research Cluster brings together researchers who are interested in sociocultural approaches to understanding language and who bring an awareness of the centrality of language issues to social and humanities research. We have a wide range of theoretical and geographical interests. Some of the broad areas of research that we're interested in include intercultural communication and translation, identities, and the role of languages and discourses in negotiating political, social, and interpersonal relationships. It's really exciting that we have 4 of our cluster members today who are going to talk about the discursive construction of COVID-19 and the social disruptions that it has caused, with a focus on Japan and Korea. So I want to say thank you to the panel members, and thank you to Melissa for organizing and sharing the webinar. And thank you to all of the audience, both for attending and for your contributions to the discussions that we'll have after the presentations. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Michael. And as you can hear, we thought that this is a fascinating topic because, we're all asking ourselves, what changes have COVID-19 brought to our social structures and language? So I'm just going to get your views. I'm putting up a poll at the moment to get your views on how much you think COVID-19 has affected social norms and language. I'll leave that up for just a few seconds while our first speaker is getting ready. So can I please introduce Dr. Sang-Young Oh, who's a senior lecturer in Korean Studies at the Asia Institute. If you'd like to turn on your video and share your screen, I will show people what the polling results were. Okay, so the majority of people here today think it has had a big effect of some sort, a lot, or a great effect. So to give us an idea of what that's meant for Korea, Dr. Sang-Young Oh, thank you. Okay, so screen is coming up, and if you can just unmute so we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
We can. Please do start, Sang-Young.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sang-Young Oh, Senior Lecturer in Korean Studies. Thank you all for coming today. For almost a year, our lives have been heavily affected by the pandemic. Its impact on humanities and the global economy is beyond our capacity to control. COVID-19 has changed our daily routines, the way we communicate, and more importantly, how we perceive people in different cultures and different beliefs. The physical lockdown has portrayed us to surface our true identities and the flip side of human nature. In this webinar, I would like to share the Korean identity embedded in the language and how Koreans perceive COVID-19 with a nationalistic perspective. So I started my research by looking up the word coronavirus in the Korean newspaper archive from 1920 to 1999. It was the 1960s the word coronavirus first appeared in articles, altogether 12 times until 1999, in health column, in science section, and also in the business section. Especially in health column, information about coronavirus was nothing less than what we know today. For instance, it describes symptoms such as fever, cough, runny nose, chills, and fatigue, and also notes that there's no cure, but it goes away by itself, and recommend to rest well and drink a lot of water, so on and so forth. In fact, COVID-19 is not the first pandemic in world history as we know it. For Korea alone, Joseon, Korea had landed in a mysterious epidemic, cholera, in 19th century. Hundreds of thousands of people had died over the decades, except one group of people. Do not mix old rice with new rice, boil old food, don't spit saliva, or blow your nose anywhere. After emptying the bowels, bury the feces under the ground. Don't throw away dirty water anywhere. If you follow this, you won't be infected. These 5 rules were set by Choi Si-hyung, the second leader of Donghak Eastern Learning. This clearly demonstrates the perception of hygiene in Donghak during the modern transition time of Joseon Korea. By practicing this, Donghak was free from epidemic of cholera and other contagious diseases and saving many lives of Koreans, mostly peasants and the poor. As it was the time of forced open port by West, Koreans perceived the epidemic as a foreign invasion, something to fight against. In fact, the founder of Donghak, Choi Jae-woo, named it as opposed to Seohak, Western learning, that is Catholicism, with its philosophy of enlightenment and humanism to restore the dignity of all kinds of people. Donghak became the most prominent religious group within 30 years, with more followers than that of Buddhism, with 1,000 years. Donghak later became the axis of Donghak peasant movement in 1894 and arose people around the Korean peninsula to fight against the great powers, justice, and equality. Likewise, in early 2020, Donghak emerged again in Korea, this time to resist COVID-19. Koreans are well known for their strong disposition to being united in crisis. In trying times, Koreans always put the nation first. So this March 2020, the Korean stock market plunged due to the impact of the onset of COVID-19. The foreign investors sold off all stocks. Individuals with limited capitals called up for Donghak Nth movement and responded to the market bravely and saved the economy eventually. So this is a good example of how the word Donghak associated with nationalism in Korea. Koreans are known for a collective mindset that individuals and nation often consider synonymous. Putting country atop, Koreans don't mind sacrificing individual comfort and needs. In good times, they also glorify and identify national success as personal achievements. 우리ism, we, is based on a mutual emotional foundation shaped from numerous invasions by neighboring countries in history. and engraved upon Koreans' mind with Han and Jung, that is the mix of pain, sadness, and empathy. As a result, COVID-19 is translated as a foreign invasion we must defeat together. And the pandemic scoreboard has been regarded as a global competition like Olympic Games. Well-controlled numbers of infections and successful quarantine system have elevated strong nationalism and national pride among Koreans. However, 우리 cannot exist without opponent, 남, others. And it justifies exclusion of non-Uri from the inner circle. The dichotomic paradigm creates divided society of multiples of two. Strong Urism can easily throw blame into outsider of Uri, although the majority doesn't rectify the truth. So the pandemic has brought the global into severely polarized society these days. As much as national pride and unity are essential, I think we should not undermine the danger of polarization of people by differences. So in my paper, I will discuss more on language examples to reflect the social behaviors in Korea. Thank you for listening.
And thank you very much. That's a wonderful teaser for what we're looking forward to discussing today. If you found anything in there interesting, intriguing, you want to know more, there is a way to do that. Please use the question and answer function. And as you've got these thoughts, put them in there because we're going to look forward to having a discussion following. So thank you very much, Sun-Young. So can I now please introduce Associate Professor Claire Marie, who's the convener of the Japanese Studies program at the Asia Institute. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you very much. And my name's Claire Marie. I'd like to also acknowledge that I'm presenting on unceded lands and pay my respects to the Indigenous owners and also elders past, present, and emerging. My pronouns are she, her, they, and today I'm going to be speaking with you about a project that is emerging as we speak in response to what's happening in the pandemic space. I'm using a lot of images today, so I have to put a copyright warning up and we'll just get through that. So on March 24th, the IOC, in collaboration with Tokyo 2020 Games, announced the postponement of the 2020 Games and Paralympics due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, many things are being put on hold in the host city of Tokyo. And October 30th was the date that the 2020 Games announced that it would be possible to refund tickets if you would be unable to make the event in 2021. One initiative that is not on hold, however, is the Pride House Tokyo. Today I want to talk a little bit about that, but first conceptualize why I'm talking about dis-ease and the LGBT boom. We need to understand whether this fits into the current climate of Tokyo and Japan more broadly. The first thing to note is that LGBT as a term has been experiencing a boom, and this occurs around about the time that Tokyo is announced to be the host of the 2020 Games. The main impetus for this is the inclusion of sexual orientation in the fundamental principles of Olympianism, and this kind of requires the host city/nation to respond and to enact certain things that make sure that there will be no discrimination according to the fundamental principles in Section 6. So the vision of the Games, there are 3 visions of the Games, and each game, the modern day Games, have legacies that are meant to carry on. One of the key pillars or foundations in the 2020 Games is diversity and inclusion. And this is where diversity and inclusion is where anything related to gender identity and also sexual orientation fits in. It's interesting to note that Tokyo 2020 received a Silver and Best Practice Award from the Pride Index for its incorporation of LGBT issues within the pillars of the Games. So the LGBT boom, I'm using this as a term, and it's a term that's entered the popular vernacular around about 2014, although it has been used within community discourse for a longer time. It is specifically LGBT within the Japanese context, and it is specifically tied to developing markets, untapped markets. So there's a period around 2014 to 2015 when LGBT becomes a key term that floats around mainstream media. And we can see on the bottom of the screen examples of where it is explained to audience who are positioned as not knowing what LGBT might mean or who it may be referring to. This is in tensions with a long history within contemporary Japan, dating at least to the 1950s, where LGBT, in different terms, using different terminology, has been a mainstream staple of entertainment and has been within mainstream media a central pivotal figure. The queer queen is who I refer to that as. So this rebirthing or rebranding of issues to do with sexuality, sexual minorities, and also to do with gender within the framework of the pre-2020 Games is an example of hypervisibility and an example of how there are different booms around key terms within the discursive environment of the Japanese mediascape. The other important part of this discursive space is that from around 2014 onwards, there have been interventions into political discourse and also at the local, more kind of broader municipal, Tokyo, regional, and also up to the upper national government. And on the side of the screen there, I've got a kind of a list of different things that have occurred within this time frame. One of them being the most recent, the incorporation of SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity, the acronym SOGI, as a part of the amendments to the Act on Comprehensive Promotion of Labour Measures and Stabilisation of Employment of Employees, which is basically an anti-harassment in the workplace, anti-bullying, a piece of legislation. It comes into act from the 1st of June 2020 for larger corporations, and for smaller corporations from 2022, April. So this is kind of the background of the social movements that are also occurring at different levels within the Japanese contemporary climate. Pride House, how does this fit in? Well, Pride House is something that has emerged from the Vancouver Olympics as a pop-up space, somewhere where people who are attending mega events, mega Olympic events, can congregate without fear of being discriminated against. And diversity in pride is the bottom of the slide there, is the logo for the Pride House Tokyo, Japan 2020. Now, the idea was that this would be on during the Olympics and the legacy would continue after the Olympics. But we're in an interesting kind of pause at the moment, and Pride House was actually officially opened on October 11, just gone. And so it is preempting the Olympics itself, which is quite an interesting fact. So we can see that there are different legacies being built around things such as the Pride House and interventions through initiatives such as Rainbow Diet, where there is this discourse between politicians and also local community groups and activists to make changes in the space before and within the Olympic discourses themselves. But the discourse of dis-ease / I'm trying to play with words in the pandemic there, is also very strongly also there within the space in contemporary Japan. Very well known is Sugita Mio's official, there's official photo of her from her site, the argument that LGBT support has gone too far when we've just seen there's very little support. And also most recently, just around about the time that the Pride House opened, local Adachi Ward of Tokyo member puts out a very kind of mundane argument that we've heard many times, that if all Japanese people become G or L, then there will be no next generation, and Adachi Ward, and indeed all of Japan will die out. So there's an interesting tension here that emerges between a more progressive discourse around rights to do with sexuality / sexual orientation / gender, and the conservative discourses that put this at dis-ease with the more progressive discourses. However, the Tokyo municipality itself is bound to show that it will not discriminate, and so the LGBT boom itself cannot be put on hold. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you for showing the way that, that COVID-19 specifically, the delay with the Tokyo Games has had that effect. It's fascinating to see that discourse and those changes. So again, if people have any questions, do remember to put them in the Q&A. We love hearing those, and we're looking forward to getting to those soon. We're about to move, continuing on with Japan, and I'm going to ask a question for you there at home. What's your view? Do you think people have been affected in their politeness after COVID-19? And I know this is an area of great interest for our next speaker. So can I please introduce Dr. Juno Hashi, who's a senior lecturer in Japanese studies at the Asia Institute. And Jun, if you could please turn on your video, turn on your slides. We will see what the results of the polling are. Great. Interesting. I wasn't sure what the results of this one would be. So if you can see here, the view is that I have to say pretty mixed. Not clearly more or less polite, quite a few about the same. So I'm going to be interested. Jun will be talking both about Japan and Australia. So again, we'll get some comparative information. Thanks again. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Juno Hashi. I'm from Asia Institute, a Japanese program, University of Melbourne. Today, I'd like to talk about a mask wearing or non-mask wearing in comparing a situation in Japan and Australia, looking into the social media, popular social media, Reddit, and also Hatsugen Komachi in Japan. So this is a situation in 23rd of June in Melbourne. This is about the same time in Japan. So this is definitely there is no sort of tight regulation, no fine, but they voluntarily wear masks. So I don't need to sort of explain the situation. And this is the current situation about mask wearing. So my talk is based on the notion of social norms, which is fluid and also discursive, emotional and behavioral patterns of individuals, and shared by other people and partly sustained by the approval and disapproval, by the feelings of embarrassment, anxiety, guilt, and shame that a person suffers at the prospect of violating them. The social norm is tightly related with the social identities, because we position in relation to what other people sort of understand sort of our behavior. So we position in favor of kind of mainstream thinking. So we tend to form the notion of sense of community by identifying outsiders. So we tend to use marking outsiders by negative evaluative language such as bad, or you can think of any sort of but sort of evaluative language, which I'm going to show you. And also we tend to amplify kind of common or imagined attributes of in-group member possess So we create kind of sense of community, idea of in-group. At the same time, we amplify a negative attribute of outsiders. So we often create inside, sort of outside groups at the same time. This is something we're going to look into in the social media outlets. So this is Reddit. So I looked at the threads actually occurred in the 26th of July. Within 24 hours, the amount of posts exceeded actually 700 and attracting 2.9K bystanders. So interestingly, so before COVID-19, there is no kind of mentioning about mask, surgical mask. So the best thing I can get is actually the kind of community of masks, this image. So just after the COVID-19, there are lots of threads about mask, or you can imagine. So through the one of the sort of excerpts, this is one of the data I collected. This is a sequence of posts. So you can see what's happening. So good is used as a positive evaluative label. And then looks like there is a third one. Oh yes, she's now a masked person. It's kind of approval. And this is a masked person is a kind of identity label. And how ridiculous. So this is how ridiculous is quite interesting. This is something we need to look into. So, but if you look all the 750 posts, the third person, the handle name, I don't know how to read. This person's position is very clear. So stay home. So mask wearing is not a solution. So for this person, mask wearing is actually negative label. So how ridiculous is actually a very, very sarcastic idea. So at the first glance, I actually, when I had a look at this data, or I thought this is kind of threesome post, the final person actually frame it, or mask person kind of identity. Okay, that's brilliant. But if you look into this is a mask person, is actually outsiders label for this person. That's very, very interesting. But for the social practitioners at this here and now, this very moment, and also bystanders, I think they might probably interpret it that, okay, there's a happy threesome conversational kind of string. Okay, they're happy they created in-group ideology and sort of membership. Idioms should be tend to use to label outsiders. So the third one is very, very interesting. Sorry. Okay, so I would like you to have a look. So identifying sort of outer group members by giving them a negative evaluative label is enough to identify outsiders, but they are not good enough to create the sense of kind of in-group sense of community as a in-group members. But what kind of language items are effective is this actually the proud and happy I found quite effective to create the sense of community. So so proud is always come with us and connect and community, and also this person, the second person, actually reword Melbourne into hometown and so on. So proud is very, very strong vocabulary to create the sense of community or in-groupness. But happy is also used in a similar context, but not as strong as proud. Okay, so what we have seen, the preliminary discovery is that in Melbourne, sort of Reddit, people use negative evaluative vocabulary to identify art group. At the same time, they use evaluative and also emotive vocabulary such as proud and happy to create kind of sense of in-group or sense of community. So how about in Japanese social media? So this is a Hatsugen Komachi. This is attached to Yomiuri newspaper. This is one of the largest circulation in Japan. So meiwaku is the kind of keyword, and there is no such negative label to identify others, but they kind of tend to use meiwaku to identify sort of outsiders. So meiwaku means trouble for others, and also someone trouble me is also meiwaku. So I use a kind of double-edged sword metaphor here. So these are the examples. So this is actually meiwaku, and then meiwaku and hijoshiki, lack of common sense. So there is no stupid and idiot, but hijoshiki ningen is actually sort of, well, I put it insane people, but sort of lack of common sense. So this is another one, meiwaku. So there's a lot of meiwaku here as a keyword. So, okay, time is running out. The very recent the post I discovered says, my workplace, 70% of workers without masks. This is very, very scary post. And if you look into it, well, this is something I'm going to look into today. But according to the information I just received, people are talking about many small-scale workplace. People don't wear masks. So I think there is no mention of meiwaku here, but rather I think they have very interesting sense of in-group, out-group. Like if you go out and take public transportation, you're in the out-group, outside. But in the workplace, you're inside, so in-group. So it's safe to not wear masks. So it reveals that in Japan, unlike the public image of the photograph, foreign gaze of the Japanese society, people sort of walking with a mask 100%, but it's not the case. If you just open the door of the medium to small scale workplace, they don't wear masks. So this is something I need to look into. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you very much, Jun. Again, I think we're getting some fascinating themes coming in here. Things around communality, in-groups, out-groups, inclusion. I think there's a lot of themes that we're going to be dealing with in questions. And I'll thank the people who are already putting lots of questions up. So we have questions from Craig Smith, Gwyn McClellan, Lei Yu. Please, if anything is sparking your interest, please do put the question up. So I'm now coming to our last speaker. And I've got one more poll. I like hearing your views. So this is again that question around how has the pandemic affected everyone? Has it been equal? Have different groups been affected differently? I'll leave a few seconds. So if I can introduce Patrick Murphy. He's a PhD candidate at the Asia Institute, and I'll just get him to share his video and share his slides. Excellent. And I think you can see here, Patrick, we have very clear results. People do not think the pandemic has affected everyone equally. So please tell us more.
Happily. Just bring this up. Oops. So I'm going to be talking about a bit on kind of risk, stigma, desire in the kind of COVID-19 kind of context. So getting into this first, particularly with queer communities, the LGBT plus community, risk is going to be something that is a bit larger during pandemics, during disasters. In Japan, during the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, this was seen, especially with people's private lives suddenly being made public. So even just I say it like it's a small thing, but it's actually quite large, of someone's home being destroyed, even if the home is not of water coming in, suddenly private things, private lives are made public, resulting in forced outings or discussions that people weren't ready to have with either family members or communities. Also in the kind of subsequent days and weeks and even months after this, having to be in communal housing, temporary housing with gendered spaces presented more problems. And in COVID-19, we're seeing similar things happening. In China, particularly with HIV positive patients, where due to restrictions around social distancing, medication is being mailed to patients with HIV. There were issues then of potential risk of either being outed as HIV positive or as queer, and the kind of discrimination that could result from that. This was particularly a problem as COVID-19 was happening around the Lunar New Year. So many patients were with family and were dealing with reduced privacy there as well. In South Korea, there was also controversy around the use of contact tracing, particularly around a gay nightclub and the potential for people being outed as well. So risk is definitely something that's coming into play here for people in the queer community. And then if we're looking at, especially in white dominant societies and cultures, we're also seeing a lot of anti-Asian discrimination, racism, which has been here before. An example of this is media representation for Asian identities. The Crazy Rich Asians film in 2018 sparked a lot of discussions about this, the lack of representation, and also that what representation was there was quite poor, right? People being placed in roles as villains, as kind of comedic side roles, rather than as kind of the main characters within media. In Australia in particular, we saw this happening in a lot of different avenues as COVID-19 became what it was today, right? Over the last 9 months, we've seen an increase in mistreatment and discrimination towards frontline workers. We've seen discrimination, both physical and verbal violence, across Australia. We know this has happened in Melbourne, and particularly international students were being targeted, and an increased stigmatization of Asian spaces. So an example of this is Sydney and Melbourne seeing quite a sharp decline sharp decline in customers at, for example, like Chinese restaurants, where there was just a stigmatization going on. And then on more global discourses, right? Donald Trump's use of China virus to refer to COVID-19 is just furthering these issues. And specifically within the queer community, it's important to consider how these effects are kind of functioning together and how they might be layering with each other. So in the gay community, there is absolutely anti-Asian discrimination. In English-speaking queer communities, cultures, white gay men generally occupy a place of privilege and desire as this kind of normative ideal. And there's more that goes into that beyond race, right? There's ableism that is part of this. There's body shaming that is part of this, whether this has to do with the size of someone's penis, with how muscular someone is, so body types and even body language, grooming, all of these things are wrapped into what is considered desirable and what is considered ideal. And how this kind of factors in with what I'm discussing today is we see a lot of discourses over the last few years around dating sites and applications, particularly Grindr is the largest gay dating application that is used right now. So we have an image here. This is a drag queen, her name is Kim Chi, and she brought a lot of attention to the issues of people using no fats, no femmes, and no Asians in their dating profiles. This was addressed by Grindr. They started an initiative called Kinder Grindr in 2017, which was really just a kind of promoting of racial equality, talking about ableism, and they brought in influencers to discuss these issues from the community. But we didn't really see until 2020 that Grindr and then similar other applications, Jacked and Scruff, which are just kind of the same thing, but another application, until just this year, really a few months ago, it was still possible to filter who you saw on the application by using ethnicity as a filter. And so it really wasn't until a few months ago that this was actually removed. So just wrapping this up, it's really important as we get into the ability to study kind of cultural and societal impacts of COVID-19, of taking a intersectional framework into these approaches and how people are being impacted disproportionately, but on top of that, then how existing discrimination and racism and issues, particularly within the queer community around body image, body shaming, and ableism, how those things may work together during COVID-19 to be more harmful for some people than others. And especially when we're talking about Asian communities, that we think about the multiplicities of identity that exist there. There are many different backgrounds that people are coming from, especially in very multicultural countries. And it's something that can't be applied, kind of the same approach can't be applied to everyone. Everyone has very different stories and backgrounds. And that's just something that's important to consider. Thank you.